Prison officials in Louisiana have been ordered to remove children who are imprisoned in what was previously the death row section of Louisiana State Penitentiary, commonly known as Angola. This order from a federal judge declared that children can no longer be locked up at this penitentiary and that holding children here amounted to cruel and unusual punishment. That's what we'll be diving into today on The Left Wing. I'm Dr. Erica of the Cocktails and Capitalism podcast, and I'm joined by my co-host, Desmond Price of Independent Thought, as well as two guests today, Jordan Barney and Heather Schmidt of the 805 Uncensored podcast. So diving into, hey. So yeah, Angola is America's largest maximum security prison. There are over 6,000 prisoners there, and it is notorious for its human rights abuses. It also is notorious for its kind of legacy of slavery. So it was named Angola after the former slave plantation that existed on this land. And it has kind of really carried on this bloody history of slavery and oppression. It is called America's bloodiest prison. Many people have called it that. And they have been housing teenagers there. So Democracy Now! Says, for the past 10 months, children, mostly Black boys, have been held in solitary confinement, denied family visits, deprived of education and mental health treatment, among other inhumane conditions. So basically what happened was, after these high-profile escapes, suicides, and active violence by youth in other facilities, Governor John Bell Edwards announced that they were going to be moving several children to Angola, and they've been there for months now. But the reports of what it's like there for these children at this horrible, horrible facility where they have, death row and, execution chambers and everything, the reports are just horrifying. So I heard one person who has been doing a lot of work to cover this talking about how many of the children were, because they're placed in solitary confinement in these tiny cells with just a bed, a light, a bathroom, a toilet. They have been dismantling the light fixtures and some parts of their beds to dig through the walls, to dig through the light fixtures, to get to the people in the other cells, because they're so isolated and just deprived there that they're just looking for human interaction and trying to reach other people. That part fucking broke my heart. So yeah, I don't know. I guess I'll just open this up and talk a little bit, or ask you guys what you think about this, but maybe I'll stop this by just quoting from one of the teens who was formerly imprisoned there, who said, "They took years away that was supposed to teach us how to grow up and be a man, and replaced it with straight violence." That was such a striking line. But yeah, what are your guys' reactions to all this?
I mean, just like the history of the way that you started it, that it's built on a former plantation. This is just a continuation of what America is founded on, which is just slavery, violence, genocide, white supremacy, etc. This is a horrific thing that, like, where do we even begin? Like, how does this happen other than just acknowledging what this country is founded on?
Yeah.
I have nothing else to say about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I read recently that a number of organizations have started warning their members, and a number of countries have started warning their citizens about the United States because of our recent, track record with the LGBTQ plus community, and especially with the trans community, because we've got some human rights issues, right? But this just, like, to me, this story is is putting on total display how much of a disaster this country has become, and how human rights, I mean, we go around and lecture other countries about the way that they treat people, and the way that they should be behaving. But I mean, just look at, like, stories like this, right? How, like, dare anyone uh lecture other other countries or other people when this is the kind of stuff we have going on here, right?
Yeah.
And I agree with Jordan. This is just a continuation of our history and who we are. And yeah,
Mhm.
it's disgusting,
Yeah.
Say the
actually.
absolute least.
Yeah.
Typically this is the point where I would probably come in and give my long antiquated speech about all the things that we just heard. But I have two different things that I wanted to address here. But before I get into either one of those, I feel like I might derail the conversation a little bit. So I actually want to do a quick pivot and ask Erica if you'll jump in really quickly and just say, like, what were your initial thoughts on the story before I kind of, I think, take us in a little bit of a different direction here.
Yeah, I mean, they were very similar to what Heather and Jordan were saying. I mean, just the fact that this is so indicative of the state of this country and the history of this country. It just really encapsulates a lot of the horrors that we are founded on. And yeah, I mean, it really demonstrates in this very visceral way, like how also slavery has continued in a different form in this country through the 13th Amendment, through prison labor. Prisoners at this facility are being paid 20 cents an hour to pick fruits and vegetables. Just, they're getting paid a little bit, but like just like the slaves were doing back in the day on this plantation. And for a while they were doing convict leasing here right after after the Civil War. So that stopped, but still this is just a facility where what we do to the marginalized people is we exploit them as a resource to increase wealth in this country. And the fact that young people would even be sent to the same facility that is the bloodiest one in the country, that is just mind-blowing. And absolutely, it just needs to end right now. And one organization for folks to support if they want to try to help with this cause is Family and Friends of Louisiana's Incarcerated Children, FFLIC. They're working to reform the Louisiana school system and the juvenile justice system by dismantling the school to prison pipeline. So
That's exactly what I was just thinking about, the school to prison pipeline.
yeah.
Like, here we have these children that are locked up behind bars when they could be educated. They could be literally anywhere else would be better for them.
Yeah.
Anywhere. And that's, I think I now want to talk about this pivot that I was mentioning before. When we have these conversations with people, I know that I've had them with people in my life. People on the right, unsurprisingly, seem to have very little sympathy for these conversations. But uncomfortably enough, a lot of people on the left seem to also be lacking a lot of sympathy when we're having these conversations. And that's the question that I more or less want to pose is, when we're talking about, because it's not just this, we talk about people like prisoners and how they have to deal with these 140-degree temperatures in these places, or the labor that they're being asked to do, or the solitary confinement. We saw that Democrats recently in the House talking about passing a bill to end solitary confinement, but it basically went nowhere. We'll see if that changes. But it just feels as though, and honestly, on top of that, I recently asked people if they thought that, hey, if you're in jail, do you think you should still have the right to vote? Most people who I talked to on the left said no. So I just, yeah.
What?
And so I am just constantly asking myself this question: why is there such a lack of empathy for people who are incarcerated? And I have plenty of thoughts myself, but before I take up the airtime here, I kind of just want to hear from all of you. Like, why do you think there's so many people, especially people who claim to be on the left, seem to have no regard whatsoever for these people who are incarcerated?
Well, first of all, I think that you just mentioned empathy. In the beginning of COVID in 2020, Scientific American ran a really great article that cited a study that had been worked on for years about America's empathy deficit.
Wow.
And it's not just about people that are incarcerated, it's about everything. People in America overwhelmingly have lost their ability to empathize, to have compassion for other people, to even recognize some people as like even existing or relevant. And like scientists and psychologists, they like debate about what the cause is. A lot of people think it's social media. A lot of people think that it's like privilege and white privilege and wealth. With respect to especially the incarcerated, and as you mentioned, like people on the left even having very little sympathy for people that are incarcerated, I think it's just privilege. It's just we have so much privilege.
Yeah.
And I do I'll have to send you guys that article because it is so good, because it goes into this growing problem that's just happening right now, right? Like at the worst time for it to
Yeah.
happen, because we have all of these other problems going, like societal problems, not just like the pandemic, but this incarceration issue. We've got the food insecurity. People have a difficulty empathizing with people that can't afford food.
Yeah.
Like, make that make sense, you know? I mean, there's a woman that I know that lives in Thousand Oaks, and she's a Democrat. She helps organize the Democratic Women's Group. And she says, if people can't afford food, get a second job. And I'm like, what the fuck?
Jesus.
Like, what? You're a
That's a
Democrat.
whole nother
And
conversation.
and when they can't afford food with their second job, they're supposed to
Yeah.
get a third job and a fourth job.
Then what? And then what? Will you
Yeah.
invite them to your brunch every month?
Yeah.
I mean,
Did
Jesus.
she write that? Did she write that article by chance that said, to save money, you should start skipping breakfast?
yeah, right. But I think in answer to your question, Desmond, I think there's a bigger thing going on here with Americans and an ability to empathize
Mhm.
and have compassion. And I welcome answers to what is causing it, because it's getting worse in my view.
Yeah, Jordan, what are your thoughts on this? Why do you think that there's such a lack of empathy
The only
for
thing that I
people who are
can
incarcerated?
Yeah, the only thing that I can think of is economic conditions. I think people are so crushed by capitalism and economically that it's forced them to make decisions that ultimately are for themselves and just for their families and their immediate relatives. And so that has diminished their capacity to empathize with other people and to frankly give a shit about other people's lives. And I just think it's a really horrifying reality of late stage capitalism.
I was going to say the same thing, unsurprisingly.
Stole your talking points.
No, it's great. I'm so glad. Yeah, just capitalism has really, we're seeing this like hyper individualism where people are all out for themselves. It's this kind of like dog eat dog world where you just have to get yours and what you need for your family, and then fuck everyone else because you can't even, think past the next day and, the next paycheck. So I think you're right. It's the crushing economic conditions that kind of put us at odds with each other that makes it much harder for us to empathize with other human beings. And isolation, being isolated in our bubbles on social media, all of these things all play into that as well.
Heather, I think when you said the word privilege, I think that is like a one-word answer for me, but I want to go a little bit further with it. Because I think that, you're mentioning capitalism, but that kind of just explains maybe the detachment of people who are on the lower economic, scale. People who are benefiting from capitalism, they're detached too. So that's not really their excuse, right? It's just, there's so many people in this country who have never touched the, carceral system, either directly or indirectly.
Yeah.
I'll speak from experience because I've touched it. I have been incarcerated, and I grew up with friends of mine who also were, and we were kids. We were kids. I went to jail as a kid, and I had friends who went to jail as children, and the system is brutal. And the reasons how you land there are ridiculous, like smoking marijuana, or maybe you stole something out of a Walmart and then you miss like a probation meeting, and the next thing you know, you're in jail, and then you're there for months, and then you get out and maybe you smoke weed again. You're there for a year, and then your childhood is essentially gone.
Yeah.
It's essentially gone. And then you are very likely to be in and out of prison throughout your entire 20s and into your 30s. And that's how easily it can be for so many people to get lost in this system. I have friends who I know, who I grew up with, who never recovered from any of that. Some did, some didn't. and it's absolutely unbelievable how quickly these things can just spiral and how the system preys upon you. Like you think that, like, oh, well, you have to be really bad to be a kid and to go to jail. No, you don't. No, you really don't. Like, it's so simple to be caught up in the probation violations that they will get you on, or the very minute details. They can take a child basically out of someone's home and put them into prison. How easily they take kids away from some of their parents, for being essentially pretty poor. It's one of those things where unless you have a direct experience with it, you delude yourself into believing that, though, these kids, maybe they deserve to be there. And so you have this like detachment from the fact of like, oh yeah, it's someone in prison. Why should I care about what's happening to them? You should be asking yourself how they got there in the first place. But so many people never stop and ask themselves that question because it's never been relevant to their life, never whatsoever. And so I would hope that as time goes on, we can have more of these conversations about how people end up in prison, because I think that might be the thing that allows people to fully grasp how dire these situations are. Because a lot of people who end up in prison are there, honestly, if we want to circle it back, because of capitalism, because they are so just like, because the economic conditions in this country are so bad that so many people find themselves in these situations in the first place because they are so economically disadvantaged. I know basically everyone that I know who was a part of that, none of those people, none of us ever came from money. No one. Everyone was struggling to survive. Everyone was. And so it's not a fluke that those are the same people who are in and out of the carceral system in this country.
And when you're talking about how removed people are from the system, you even have to look at things like planning decisions. Like here where Jordan and I are, our jails are as far removed from like the community as they could possibly be. Like the juvenile center, you have to drive down like a 5-mile road with nothing else there before you get there. There's a reason why they're removed. There's a reason why when they bring like the prisoners from the county jail to help clean up the local park, they make sure to do it at a day and a time that no one else is using the park. And it's not for people's safety. It's so that people are not seeing that these are human beings.
Yeah, it's an eyesore is what it is.
Because, and I mean, we've been at the park when the county jail shows up with these guys, and it's like my kids are like, they're just normal people. Like my 6-year-old's just waving at the guys, and the guys are like, hey. They're just normal people. And I think to your point, Desmond, if you start getting that in people's face, they're going to start empathizing with that. And I think that is why planning and programming within the government is very intentional to keep it as far away from people as possible, because it perpetuates that, right? And then people don't have empathy for that group of people, right?
Very true.
That's why that needs to change in my view. I see no reason why we can't have prisoners doing their like community service type stuff or whatever. Like, I mean, a lot of the times when they're out at their park, they're just sitting there chilling. It's like a break for them, I see no reason why they can't enjoy the park when other people are enjoying the park. There's no reason to not. So
yeah, the last thing I want to say, about this subject in particular is we also need to be but we need to be going further into what exactly it is that we're criminalizing in society. I want to highlight for a second what's happening here in Montana, in one of the blue communities right down the road here, in Bozeman, Montana, College Town. They are now essentially criminalizing homelessness in a new way. Obviously we're seeing things happening in places like Houston, for instance. Erica, you've been doing a lot of work talking about food, not bombs, for instance, which is great. I'm glad that Cocktails and Capitalism is covering that so much. In Bozeman, Montana, they are now saying they're going up for a vote next week where they're going to say that if you are unhoused, you can't stay in one spot for more than 5 days. And if you do, you get hit with $100 fine. And you better believe that if you don't pay those fines, they'll be bringing you to jail.
Yeah.
So on top of the housing crisis being what it is, this blue city is now going to be trying to be criminalizing people for being unhoused, on top of the fact that, they're already poor because, they're unhoused. So obviously they couldn't afford a home, but now they have to be essentially dealing with these $100 fines, essentially making it so that it's going to cost them tens of thousands of dollars to be unhoused within this city. It's totally dystopian, totally bleak. And these are the types of things that we need to be asking ourselves. Why are we criminalizing existing in our society?